Hello, and welcome to another conversation about photography. I'm joined by my colleague, Alan Constant from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and our guest this time, Jare Israel, who lives in the Front Range of the Colorado Mountains. I am Paul Rowland. I'm coming to you from just outside of Tokyo, Japan. Jare is a photographic artist, and we are excited today to talk about his photography, which he exclusively does in black and white and monochrome. So I'm looking forward to another interesting conversation. Jare, could you please tell us about your background and how you got into photography in the first place, please?
As a child, I grew up in a really religious home, but there wasn't really any emphasis placed on the arts at all. I think my first experience of what I came to think of art as a child was going to a Thomas Kincaid gallery and seeing pretty much the same scene over and over. A little cottage with light coming out of it. It was beautiful, but I think my parents, like many people, misunderstood craft for art. And then that's not to talk down on Thomas Kincaid in any way. It's just that I think he was, making something for a certain group of people that sold, and so he just stuck with a template. And it was beautifully done, and they really, they could give you an emotional response, I think, but by the criteria that I have come to define art, that isn't the same thing as what I'm trying to do. Um, so then in my teenage years, I first dabbled with photography and I had a little Nikon Coolpix and I took pictures of animals. And at the same time, skateboarding entered into my life, which was a 20-year endeavor and what I did before I became a nurse. And I did go to college one year before that, and I took an art class and I did some wood block print making, which I really liked, and some painting and some wood sculpture. But skateboarding was clearly my priority, and so I dropped out of college after that year to pursue skateboarding full time. And when I was 29, so this is a jump from like 18 to 29, where photography and art really wasn't much of a part of my life. I had a severe ankle injury, and it was kind of the end of skateboarding. And by that time, I was, 28, 29, and skateboarding is a young man's game. And I got really, really depressed and was just thinking, like, what am I going to do after skateboarding? Because so much of what I liked about myself and what I identified with was me as a skateboarder. And I thought, what am I going to be without that? And this is when photography entered back into my life, and in a lot of ways, I feel like saved my life because it gave me a new direction and something to pursue that still gave me that sense of progressing as a human being, which skateboarding definitely did because I was always trying to learn, push, 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 film. And so the medium shifted, but um, being out in nature, I thought was really healing. I think that was a part of it because I was very interested initially in landscape photography, and black and white work had no place in it. I liked color landscape work. That's what I was trying to do. And I was reading a lot of Galen Rowell and Joe Cornish at the time and looking at their work. This was mostly wide angles, strong foreground, lead-in lines, sunsets, waiting on the light. And this too, by my criteria, is so different than what I'm trying to do. But that was the beginning. I moved to Colorado after nursing school and began hiking like crazy. And I didn't know why, but Ansel Adams' work started speaking to me much more than Mark Adamus or Galen Rowell or the color works. It was more beautiful, I think, but it didn't have the something I couldn't put my finger on. And I was introduced around this time to the work of Minor White. And so I ordered a book of his and I flipped through it and I thought, well, there's a lot of naked guys in this, and I don't know if this is really like the kind of work I'm trying to do. Um, it really didn't speak to me, which is incredibly interesting now looking back. That, Miner talked of photography as like the crafting of a bent light koan, is what he called it. And just like a koan, my first experience with it was just like, no, like none of the work. I mean, even the more abstract work, it just really Ansel Adams spoke to me, I thought, in a way, and that was just not for me. And that's just like a koan. You first read it and you're like, what in the world? That doesn't make any sense. Um, so I shifted from the grand landscape around this time to more intimate scenes. And at this time, I was looking at the work of Edward and Brett Weston, Paul Caponegro, John Sexton. And that slowly transitioned into me reading some of Minor White's writing and spending, well, I tried to spend 30 minutes with a certain image. And um, I have the image here just so the viewers can kind of understand. That's the image that I chose because it didn't really speak to me. I didn't really get it. And so I was going to spend 30 minutes trying to look at it and think about it. And when I first told people this story, it seemed like really odd. And at this point, I just find it beautiful. But I was probably 15 minutes in, maybe, and something clicked. And I started crying. And it wasn't a sad cry, but it was just like something profound shifted. And that was kind of the beginning of, and this was at this point 7 or 8 years ago, but this was kind of the beginning of what I'm trying to do now in photography.
Wow. Let's dive into your work. I want to hear you talk about your images. Okay, well, we'd just love to hear you talk about them, and when we have questions, we'll ask them. But please, could you just talk about this photo, please?
So this photograph was after the experience with Minor White's images, and where I was trying to make images that were more abstract, that had some kind of a resonance that went beyond what the objective properties of the subject were. And this is one of my first images, I think, that is rich with symbolism. The sacrifice symbolism in this is what really struck me. It's a dark photograph. It's a sad photograph in a lot of ways. But at this time, I wanted nothing to do with anything man-made. And so there was another progression that, hadn't occurred yet. I would go out of my way to compose, to, take a power line out or whatever it may be, just a piece of a fence, a pole, anything. I didn't want any sign of man. Um, I wanted pristine nature. I had a feeling that I don't know if I disagree with completely at this point, but that humans were just wrecking the place. And I know that's not always true, and there are people that are trying, but that was the reason I was trying to not have any sign of people or humans in any of my work, really. I don't know if you've heard of Brooks Jensen, the editor of Lynn's work. He's a quite brilliant man. He had a quote I had read around this time in my life that he said, photography should be about life. And I remember hearing that and thinking, for whatever reason, of Dorothea Lange's photograph of Migrant Mother. And I thought, well, okay, like if you're a journalist, because for whatever reason I thought if it's about life, it has humans in it, it's about human life. That was just my understanding of the quote, and I thought, well, that's not what I'm trying to do. It's incompatible with the direction I'm trying to take. So through this period, I was hiking in Rocky 2 to 3 times every week, primarily in the winter. I was just building a portfolio of work that had some symbolism, that had a thread connecting it, and had no sign of human beings. So this was probably the first photograph that I think clearly to me had symbolic value.
Well, I completely understand how you feel, and it's very, very interesting to hear you articulate it as the reason for your move into this kind of abstract nature photography. However, the moment I look at this, I see a human in it.
Yes,
What is its symbolic value and meaning for you?
it's the sacrifice. It's our life is full of sacrifice. Can you imagine a life where you're not sacrificing in one way or another and how miserable ultimately that would be? The importance of sacrifice. I think whether I wanted to admit it or not, I associated this with a human. I'm trying to avoid all signs of human, and I'm making work that resembles human, which we'll touch on in a little while, like how that next transition came to be. But I think you're exactly right. I don't think of this as nature sacrificing or anything. The symbolic value of it is humans need to sacrifice in order to get what they really want out of life, I guess. You have to sacrifice frequently. So I think you're spot on with it being connected to humans, even though I'm trying at the time to distance myself from the human race, as it were.
Well,
Turns out I'm human, and so I think everything I'm doing has human interest in it because if I'm interested in it, there you go.
well, and for me, this image and the rest of your images are the best of what's human. And the fact that you happen to see humanness or humanity in nature just proves our intimate connection with nature and reminds us that we are nature ourselves. And it reminds me of the best values in humanity. And so your search for something which doesn't have humans ends up reflecting back maybe the things that we should be valuing and treasuring and developing in ourselves. So this really speaks to
Yeah.
me a lot.
One thing I love about your work, Jare, is you seem to go out in nature and find these abstract images. When you are looking for images, do you have a filter in your mind that's able to see it in black and white before you take it?
I'm trying to have as little filter as I possibly can. With that said, I'm sure I have loads of them that I don't realize. I think it's gotten a lot easier as the years have went by to see in black and white and to see things in tone instead of color. And many times, you can, something like, well, actually, the last image in the sequence was a great example of how two different colors can blend in black and white to almost be exactly the same, which can really make an interesting image not very interesting all of a sudden because things just get kind of muddled. I do have my camera set to have the image show up in black and white, and I've done that for years, and I think it helps to kind of see, well, what would this look like in that way? But with that said, you can still change when you're converting to black and white because I'm shooting in RAW. You have so much control nowadays over every color. You can really bring out the nuances of tone in different ways.
And also, this image, I know there's depth to it, but it looks kind of flat to me. So it gives
Yeah.
us some mystery. I love mystery in a photograph. So it's hard for me to kind of quote figure out what this is. And that's the beauty. I don't have to figure it out.
I love that you're saying that. It goes right in line with the whole concept of the image. I was vacationing in Utah quite a lot at this time and going on various hikes. This is actually a hole that is quite huge. It's probably 25 to 30 feet, and people rappel through it a lot of times and when they're canyoneering. But this is called the Golden Cathedral, and it's in Neon Slot Canyon in Grand Staircase Escalante. And it's an adventure to get there for sure. You got to get a four-wheel drive road 25 miles, and then it's a 8 or 9 mile hike with some river crossings, and it's an adventure to get there, but it's so rewarding. On this trip, I always bring one book that I think will be kind of an important read whenever I go on a vacation. And I brought The Gateless Gate, which is a collection of Zen koans. So I was reading that at the time, and we went on this hike 3 days into the trip or something. And I saw this and was just like, this is the Gateless Gate. I mean, there's no, so the whole idea of the Gateless Gate is that there's no actual physical or mental barrier to overcome. The quote gate, it's not a place or a thing, but it's just a shift in perception. And so that's, so often in Zen koans, you read something, it doesn't make sense. After time, something shifts, and you're like, that's actually amazing. And it sounded like gibberish. So this to me was just, it's like there's an opening, but there's not an opening. And so you're looking up through the hole from a certain angle that there's another canyon wall above it. And so it almost looks like there's a barrier there, but there's not actually a barrier. There's just an open doorway, an open passage that looks like a wall in a way, which I think perfectly illustrates the idea of the gateless gate. This may be the image that shifted my mindset more than any single image. So I was at this time very focused on building two bodies of work, which were the Gateless Gate, which was abstract and natural scenes, primarily in the deserts and in Utah, and the Winter Symphony portfolio, which was natural scenes of ice and snow drifts and things like that. And I was very focused on that goal. I don't know if you read the essay, The Little Doorman, but this is the image that triggered the Beneath the Surface project and brought about that change. I walked by it as I was looking for, um, earlier in the week at this same spot, I had found a footprint that was frozen in the mud that had ice in it. And it's on my website. I really liked the image and I just found it so interesting. So I went back on my next day off to a different lake that was near me, trying to see if there was any like interesting ice in mud or so I was looking for a very certain thing to create a similar image to go with the first image because I knew the conditions were right for it. So I got out of the car, I'm walking, I see this, and I'm like, that's really cool, but what would I do with a picture of trash? Doesn't really go with anything that I'm doing. It's clearly a man-made chunk of trash, which brings about a feeling in me of like, man's just wrecking the place. We're just leaving trash around in the lake. And so it kind of brought a negative feeling and I thought the form's interesting, but so I didn't make the image and I walked by. So I looked around the lake for what I was searching for. I came back upon this on my way to the car and was like, what the heck? So I set up. I had my little umbrella to shade it because the light on the snow gets so harsh otherwise. So the whole project was me looking like a lunatic carrying around a big tripod and a big umbrella and taking pictures of trash. But I made the image. And I went home and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And it sat there for some months. And I finally was like, well, I need to do something with it. I need to either put it in the trash bin or finish processing it. I finished processing it and it wasn't like a moment of insight. It was a slow process of me being like, well, what am I doing? Like, what's the point of what I'm doing? If I'm not going to be open to seeing, why am I even out there? I think the beauty of it needs to be in the openness, cultivating the openness. And it was just falling in line with things that Minor White had said. At this point, I'd read uh, pretty much everything I could get my hands on from Minor White, and I'd read extensively on Zen Buddhism. And it just seemed like my approach is wrong. My approach is completely wrong. I'm too focused. It's become a barrier for me to be motivated in a certain direction. And that's when it started to become more of a contemplative practice where I don't know what in the world I'm going to try to make. And it may be something that's completely different than what I've done in the past. All the better. It's going to open a new direction. I was also at this time reminded of something. I don't know if you've heard of the photographer Cole Thompson. He said, a lot of people think of me as a landscape photographer, but I'm not any kind of a photographer. I'm just a photographer. If I see something I want to shoot, I do. And at the time when he said that, which was probably 2 years prior to this photograph being made, I remember thinking like, okay, like it works for you, but I think I need to focus on a certain thing. And I don't have any interest really in like making, like he has a portfolio of lampshades that is really phenomenal. But at the time, I was like, I don't really want to make a portfolio of just lampshades. Like, I want to go out in the world and adventure and stuff. So it really didn't resonate with me when he said it. After this image, I thought back to him saying that and was like, this is what Cole was talking about. And it turns out Cole knows a lot that I don't. Because I mean, he's a brilliant man and he's a brilliant artist.
In addition to everything you talked about in this image and what it means to you, I look at it, the textures, and there's an interesting thing going on with the textures. The like the lace-like quality of the ice next to the metal. There's a lot of depth of meaning in this image when you start looking at components like that.
One thing about this project that jumped out to me was the Japanese art of sumie. This kind of reminded me of that in a way, except instead of just dark pigments in the gesture, not so much this image in particular, but some of the images in the project are kind of dark gestures that almost look like one of those sumie paintings, but instead of the dark pigment on paper, there's texture in the snow, there's an outer form of ice, and then the dark has a bunch of texture and detail as well. I was looking at a lot of Zen art at the time, and that's kind of where the beginner's mind ended up tying in with this project in particular, is because it did seem like it had a Zen-like quality to it.
Absolutely. And like a Zen koan, the more you stare at it, well, the more you see, but also it starts staring back at me. And that reminded me of something you were saying in your one of your essays about your own visual condition, for want of a better word,
Yeah.
which had a fascinating effect for me on your sense of perception. Could you just please talk about that a little bit and how it affected your work?
It's come to seem like a unexpected gift, really. When I was 18 years old, I got in a very bad car accident. I had used the jaws of life to get me out of the car, and the result of which was over 100 stitches in my face and the pressure in my right eye going down to 6, which is, if you know anything about the pressure in the eye, you usually totally lose the vision if it's 6. Normal should be 14 to 16-ish. And so the eye was basically deflated because it was cut. So I had stitches in my eyeball, and I shouldn't even have the eye, to be honest. It's just a blessing that I even have the eye, but I can read with my right eye at this point if I hold the book very close, but distance vision at all is just blurry as can be. I've come to probably 8 years or so now when I find something that seems to have resonance that I start kind of working with and exploring with the camera. I do it with my right eye, and I can't really see detail. I can only see the form. And that's how I set the general composition because there's no detail. I can't, the subject doesn't matter. Like it's just a dark form or a white form. And then of course I use my left eye in the viewfinder for focusing.
It's very, very interesting. Thank you. Let's keep going.
I was still doing some black and white landscape work at this point, but years prior, I had been to a tropical location and really enjoyed kind of experimenting with long exposures and ocean rocks and stuff. And being landlocked in Colorado, it was always a treat to work with the ocean. So my first trip to a tropical location years prior, I had pretty much just a bunch of seascapes and long exposures. This was my trip that occurred after the Beneath the Surface project started. I went to a tropical location, and there was such a shift that had occurred that I really wasn't fully aware of. But this was the main image I came back from the trip to this tropical location with. And what struck me so much was the sadness that I felt between the people visiting, traveling to this location to visit, and the locals and what they didn't have. And that discrepancy did not sit right with me at all. This image, Welcome to Hopeless, is when I first thought Brooks Jensen was right. From what he had said about photography should be about life. While this isn't a photograph of people, because even to this day, I'm not terribly interested in photographing people. I don't think I have anything besides cell phone pics of people, really. It's more like signs of people, things that are well lived, whether it's a structure or, in this case, a tarp. I don't know if it was a home or what it was for sure, a stand for selling goods to tourists. I don't know, but it's about life. That's the shift that had occurred at that point. I think what Cole had said and what Brooks Jensen had said were both right, and it just took me a while to understand it. And it's a depressing image, I think, and the title is depressing, but it's what I felt on the trip, and it's what came out of it. It's very strange to go to a beautiful location on your vacation and make an image like this when you're surrounded by white sands and blue water, and this is where you turn your camera.
But you're looking at the world in a different way. You
Yeah.
have a curiosity to see what's, well, you're still doing that beneath the surface series, but in a different sense, in a different location. It just goes to prove that abstract photography is not merely about an aesthetic surface or, anything like that. Sometimes it's easy to dismiss it as a kind of superficial pursuit, and sometimes maybe that's what it may seem to many people. But yeah, you're looking much, much deeper. It feels as though this is not just an image. There's much more to it than that. Even the title sounds like the beginning of a novel, or just the title of a poem itself.
Yeah, I think a meaningful photograph should be a beginning of an experience. I've taken a number of college poetry classes and a few classes that were writing and interpreting poetry, which was probably more interesting than the other one, I thought, because I think a lot of what I learned there kind of affects how I try to interpret artwork of any kind at this point. I really started doing the poetry sequences as a way of solidifying my interpretation of what the story was for me. And I don't necessarily know if that's the best way to do it because I do love and appreciate when I make an image, it means something certain to me, and someone else looks at it and is like, what? That's not what I'm getting out of it at all. I find that beautiful. I know there's a lot of back and forth between some people not wanting titles, even because they want the whole experience to be rising from the viewer and not to be influenced in any way. I'm more of the school that if the person is inclined, they will still find their own experience. And many people won't understand or know how to have an experience. But I really like it. I just really enjoy it. Helps me to understand the image for myself a lot better as well, to go through the process of trying to write, even if it's just a short haiku. Like just it really helps broaden the depth of meaning for you.
In one of your essays, you talk about why you do black and white. I thought it was fascinating how you compare black and white to color. So I'd like to hear you verbalize that so our viewers can hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and to be clear, I love color artwork. I have a number of reproductions in my house of the work of Roscoe, Kandinsky, Paul Klee, Mondrian. I mean, they were all very, very into color, bright colors. And I love color in artwork. I don't know if even at this point I can fully pin down what it is that speaks to me about black and white specific to photography, because it doesn't apply to all art forms. I like the Zen Sumia painting is black and white. That's beautiful, but it doesn't apply across the board in any way. I think my favorite artworks outside of photography are all color. But I have some kind of a feeling that's very vague and hard to understand, even that there's a spiritual realm that working in monochrome is better able to capture. It may just be in my head, but it works for me when I'm thinking of images and the meaning I get out of them. Clearly, it's a departure from reality in a way that makes it closer, I think, to wrap your mind around it being more spiritual, because it is hard to get away from the objective properties of a scene in color, especially with abstract work. A lot of those colors can give away what the subject is. And in black and white, it's form. It's form instead of subject matter. And I found it very interesting. I talked a little about it in the essay, but Kandinsky, who was a huge advocate of color, I don't know that he did much black and white work besides tracings for paintings. Uh, and I've seen a lot of his work, but I think every like finished piece of artwork he ever made was color. Yet he said in his book, this concerning the spiritual in art, that black was emptiness, despair, the profound final pause, and white was the unknowable, the transcendent, pregnant with possibilities. And it seemed odd to me that when he went through all the colors, the things he said about black and white seemed the most profound, yet those were the ones he didn't really work with, other than with line. Looking back on it, it's like, well, you didn't like black and white work. You worked in the brightest colors you could find, yet the most profound things were regarding black and white that he had to say about when he was breaking down the colors. And that just again went in line with my vague feeling that I couldn't pin down. I was like, is that part of it? Instead of emotions, we're dealing with mystery, death, fear, the unknowable, the transcendent, the pristine.
Well, it just occurred to me that maybe there's something very Zen in this as well, which of course you must have thought of. But by excluding, in a sense, all of those maybe distractions of life, you talked about how color would help you identify an image. It's almost like entering a Zen monastery or going into a quiet room, switching off your phone, switching off the TV, removing yourself from other people and just focusing on what really matters. So it's almost like a visual retreat. You talked about spending 30 minutes with this. It's almost like a 30-minute sitting meditation.
So around the time of this image, I would consider it my first real wholehearted attempt of reading Carl Jung. And I was reading Man and His Symbols, which is phenomenal. If you haven't read it, it really is phenomenal. Um, but to me, this had an integration of the shadow symbolism, where the shadow you can just barely make out a structure. Like there's structure in the shadow somehow. There's organizing principles in there. There's multiple layers of pristine covering that are shattered into the shadow. And I think the integration of the shadow is a shattering of the ego into the shadow and then integrating that into your life, making the unknown known instead of running from it or, brushing it under the rug or so that's what that's what my train of thought was with this image was Carl Jung, which Carl Jung went on to be such a big part of how I define art. And Carl Jung wasn't known as an artist necessarily. He did do some paintings, but I think he was on to what art is better than anyone that I've ever read. Also, Robert Henri and the art spirit. They're on to a lot of the same ideas.
Well, you say Carl Jung wasn't an artist, but the tower, his home that he built for himself, that's just a supreme work of sculpture that he lived in,
Yeah,
right? And I
yeah,
couldn't help thinking about what you said about your experience with sculpture or woodwork early on. And your work, this one and this one almost looks like a found sculpture, but the last one as well was so tactile. It's dangerous to touch it. You're going to cut yourself.
yeah.
It's going to shatter. Yeah, I'd also like to hear what you think about the relationship between sculpture and photography as well, particularly in terms of your vision, the difficulty to see depth as well, and the flatness that Alan mentioned before. All of these things seem to be coming together somehow.
I use focus stacking techniques, of course. I'm working in full frame and I don't have tilt shift lenses or anything. So I'm definitely doing focus stacking because I want most of the time front to back sharpness and and then adjusting luminous values. You really can get depth to an image that makes it almost feel more like you could enter it as opposed to just and then of course in the gateless gate it's almost the opposite, which is what I was going for with that. I wanted it to almost appear like a wall. It didn't, I didn't want it to have depth. That depth is there but you don't know it's there, and that's the point of the image. But yeah, the sculptures that I made, they were primarily like totems is probably how I would describe them at this point. They're quite tall, and it's interesting that the vertical panorama body of work that I'm engaged in now is also like totems. But I think the depth through different techniques can make it seem almost like something you could reach through something. I like depth in images a lot and working like through windows and passages to other areas and rooms and holes in walls into other areas. Stuff like that gives it so much more interest. And that may be because of the tactile feeling that you get from looking at it. What came to mind with this one was Marcel Proust's quote of the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And also Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception. There's all these eyes looking out through what looks kind of like a door, but they are occluded, many of them. And so there is all this capability for perception, but it's in disarray and it's clogged. And this was at a sugar plant that has been abandoned. It's huge. I've had a ton of fun there, but I was looking at walls every time I'd go in. And finally, like on my sixth or seventh trip there, I looked up and I again caught myself saying, hey, are you trying to practice beginner's mind or are you just walking around looking at walls? Like I caught myself in a rut again where I was in this routine. I look at the walls for interesting subject matter. Well, sometimes you need to look up, and sometimes you need to look down. This was building on Carl Jung's ideas and the different feeling you get from looking up and down versus left and right. And left and right's more of like a scanning the environment. Up and down is more of a despair with down, and a feeling of excitement, awe, hope, looking up. And so the vertical panorama series began from that premise, and Carl Jung's ideas of looking where you least want to look. So you're actually going down to try to progress up. And this image seemed like a shadow form rising from all of these pieces that you changed about yourself to please other people. And something within you didn't agree with these changes, but you kept making changes to fit in, to please your parents, whatever it may be.
So you created this as a panorama?
Yes, and the technique's quite interesting because I'm a lot of the panorama work I'm using a 35 millimeter lens, and the tripod is kind of over the subject, and I'm using a nodal rail so they will blend together or stitch together well. And so it's almost like the bottom of the panorama is the camera looking straight down, and then the top of the panorama is the camera straight against the wall. And it gives a really interesting effect. So all of the trimmings on this image, the metal trimmings, are actually looking pretty much straight down. And then I'm inside of a large trash can in this image. I spent about an hour in the trash can, like most 40-year-olds. But the technique makes for a really interesting image, I think. So yeah, the whole project is vertical panoramas. They're huge files, but um, I really, I really like them. And this is the same thing. The bottom of it's pretty much looking down. And this again, I think was the 35 millimeter. But this made me think of a quote from Carl Jung. I'm going to read to you here. Our virtues merely allow us to be independent. When we live out of our virtues and our independence, we do not need anybody. But it is through our inferiority and incapacity that we are linked with mankind as well as with the world of our instincts. So the insight can be gained only through being out of place, not quite right, or broken. So there's all these stacked neatly parking blocks, and there's some down at the bottom that are out of place and broken, and a chunk of concrete stuck in the rebar that really just jumped out to me as an eye or insight in the break. The cracks are there, and that's how the light gets in. So this is the last image I've made. This was made 2 weeks ago. And this, I think the symbolism in here for me is being tethered to an inner need. There's something within, something deep within that you're tethered to, and you maybe can face the light, you can face the world, but you're still tethered to and are what you are. And this was the anchor point in the back here was almost the exact same color in black and white as the tree and like part of a bush that was behind it, and it just kind of blended into nothing. So I had made the image about a month ago, and the light was pretty bright too. But I thought I'm gonna try to go remake that and see if I could like find some fabric or trash or something to like hang over the side of the train and cut out the distractions because it really lost its impact. It just didn't work. And I didn't want to like just put a sky or something behind it. I wanted to try to make it work in real time in a way that spoke to me. So I went back, storm moved in, which was great, and I found a piece of trash, but it was far too small to hang over the train. So I had to run around the train each time and try to hold this up. And it was pretty high up in there, so I could barely reach it. And I spent probably 2 hours running around this train while it rained, making exposure after exposure. And there were some neighbor people that were out in their yard, and they were just like really staring at me. But ultimately, I really, really love the image. And it went from having a lot of potential but not working to, I think, working beautifully with a little bit of elbow grease.
We first started with images taken from nature, and the last few we looked at seem more industrial. So when you go out shooting, how do you decide where you want to go to find these images?
At this point, I am doing very little work in nature. I like being out in nature, but I think finding subjects that show signs of man and being lived is the work that's speaking to me the most right now. And so for about 2 years now, I'm almost exclusively just going to cities that are nearby, Denver, Cheyenne, Laramie, and loading up my equipment on my bicycle and pedaling around.
Yeah, I must just say how incredible I find this image. And it has this uncanny quality to me that it doesn't quite feel possible. Something to do with the flattening of depth, I think.
Yeah.
And the square of white in the background looks like a collage or something, like you've done it in Photoshop, like Alan
Mhm.
combines different photos into
Mhm.
composite images, but it also has a feeling of being a film still as well. We haven't really talked much about that, but just briefly, are you inspired or influenced by film? Like it feels like a still from an art house film, for example. Uh, has cinema had any influence on you?
Not really. I haven't owned a television even for going on 4 years. I haven't ever shot film besides disposable cameras as a kid, personally. With that said, the artists that have influenced me the most are all deceased at this point, but shot film. Minor White, of course, Aaron Siskind, the Westons. So I definitely am influenced by, I think those people would have probably all shot digital if it was around then. I think Ansel would have said, oh, wait, I don't have to carry 80 pounds of equipment to make 4 images. Okay, I'm in. I made this image with a 50 millimeter lens as well, and it didn't have as much flattening of field, and I wanted that. So I shot it with a 50 and an 85, and I ended up processing the 85 because it did appear flatter. And that's kind of what I wanted because it had a strange effect with the flattening of field when you have a longer lens with two things that aren't as far apart.
Well, thank you so much, Jare, for taking us through the journey of your artwork. Um, you've touched on so many big ideas. I'm inspired to read many of the texts that you've mentioned as well, and to look again at many of the artists. I just wonder if you'd like to leave us with a final word about what living an art life means to you.
Yeah, I have a few ideas and quotes here that are shaping how I'm viewing art at this point. I could read some of those.
Please do.
In the book Homo Aestheticus, I don't know if I'd recommend it, it's kind of interesting, but it says true art must be symbolic to be art. And that got me thinking about, okay, so what is the symbol? Carl Jung defines a symbol as an image that implies more than its obvious and immediate meaning. It's a living gestalt and a sum total of a highly complex set of facts, which our intellect cannot master conceptually, and which therefore are best expressed by the use of an image. Tolstoy said symbols are not opposed to reality as a mere symbol of reality, but express the unity of two realms, the penetration of the divine into this world. And I think those two go beautifully with the idea that true art must be symbolic to be art. And I haven't found any holes in that yet. That might be one of the best definitions of what art is, to have meaning far deeper than what the subject is. And I think it applies to just about everything. And I don't think that the production or trying to produce art serves any meaningful purpose whatsoever unless it changes you as a person. And also I don't think the art life is about finding answers. It's just a beautiful way to live the questions.
Well, that sounds like the perfect place to end for today. I really, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your art with us, Jer. and I just wish we had more time to keep talking
Yeah,
to
we
you.
could go on for hours.
We absolutely could, but maybe our viewers wouldn't. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jer.
Thank you, Alan.